All right, so this is the next part of chapter 7, and we're still in this same scene. This is a pivotal scene in the story. So we're getting this scene from all the different characters' perspectives so that we know what's going on and what they're thinking. This is that narrator that gives us that overall presence where we can hear the thoughts and know the feelings, know the thoughts, know what's happening with every single character, which really gives us a good insight into the story, as opposed to if it was just first person and just Artemis telling the story, we wouldn't know all the other characters' thoughts and actions and how they interpret what's happening. So this time we pick up with Juliet. Drop everything, sulked Juliet. Drop everything and check the prisoner. She flicked blonde tresses expertly over her shoulder. He must think I'm a maid or something. She hammered on the cell door with the flat of her hand. I'm coming in now, fairy girl. So if you're doing anything embarrassing, please stop. Juliet punched the combination into the keypad. And no, I don't have your vegetables or your washed fruit, but it's not my fault. Artemis insisted I come right down. Juliet stopped talking because there was nobody listening. She was preaching to an empty room. She waited for her brain to pass on an explanation. Nothing came. Eventually, the notion to take another look filtered down. She took a tentative step into the concrete cube. Nothing. Only a slight shimmering in the shadows like a mist. It was probably these stupid glasses. How are you supposed to see anything wearing mirrored sunglasses underground? And they were so 90s, they weren't even retro yet. Juliet glanced guiltily at the monitor. Just a quick peek. What harm could it do? She whipped up the frames, sending her eyeballs spinning around the room. In that instant, a figure materialized before her, just stepped out of the air. It was Holly, and she was smiling. Oh, it's you. How did you... The fairy interrupted with a wave of her hand. Why don't you take off those glasses, Juliet? They really don't suit you. Well, she's right, thought Juliet, and what a lovely voice. It was like a choir all on her own. How could you argue with a voice like that? Sure, caveman glasses off. Cool voice, by the way. Do, re, mi, and all that. Holly decided not to try deciphering Juliet's comments. It was hard enough when the girl was in full control of her brain. Now, a simple question. No problem. This is such a great idea. How many people are in the house? Juliet thought. One, and one, and one. Oh, and another one? No. Mrs. Fowl wasn't there. 3, she said finally. Me and Butler, and of course Artemis. Mrs. Fowl was here, but she went bye-bye, and then she went bye-bye. Juliet giggled. She made a joke. It was a good one, she thought. Holly drew a breath to ask for clarification, then thought better of it. That was a mistake, as it turned out. Has anyone else been here? Anyone like me? Juliet chewed her lip. There was one little man in a uniform like yours. Not very cute, though. Not one bit. He just shouted and smoked a really smelly cigar. Terrible complexion, red as a tomato. Holly almost smiled. Root had come himself. No doubt the negotiations had been disastrous. No one else? Not that I know of. If you see that man again, tell him he needs to lay off the red meat. He is just a coronary waiting to happen. Holly swallowed a grain. Juliet was the only human she knew who was probably more lucid under the mesmer. Okay, I'll tell him. Now, Juliet, I want you to stay in my room, and no matter what you hear, don't come out. Juliet frowned. This room? It's so boring. There's no TV or anything. Can't I go up to the lounge? No, you have to stay here. Anyway, they've just installed a wall television. Cinema size. Wrestling, 24 hours a day. Juliet almost fainted with pleasure. She ran into the cell, gasping as her imagination supplied all the pictures. Holly shook her head. Well, she thought, at least one of us is happy. Back to Mulch. Mulch gave his rear end a shake to dislodge any clumps of earth. Ugh, if only his mother could see him now, spraying mud on the mud people. Oh, that was irony or Something like it. Mulch had never been big on vocabulary in school. That or poetry. He'd really never seen the point. Down in the mines, there were only 2 phrases of any importance. Look, gold! And cave in! Everybody out! No hidden meanings there. No figurative language. No rhymes. The dwarf buttoned his back flap, which had been blasted open by the gale emanating from his nether regions. Time to make a run for it. Whatever hope he'd had of escaping undiscovered had been blown. Quite literally. Mulch retrieved his earpiece, screwing it in firmly to his ear. Well, you never knew. Even the LEP might prove useful. And when I get my hands on you, convict, you'll wish you'd stayed down in those mines. Mulch sighed. Ah, well, nothing new here then. Clasping the safe's treasure tightly in his fist, the dwarf turned to retrace his steps. To his utter amazement, there was a human entangled in the banisters. Mulch was not one bit surprised that his recyclings had managed to hurl the elephantine mudman several yards through the air. Dwarf gas had been known to cause avalanches in the Alps. What did surprise him was the fact that the man had managed to get so close to him in the first place. You're good, said Mulch, wagging a finger at the unconscious bodyguard. But nobody takes a body blow from Mulch Diggums and stays on their feet. The mudman stirred, the whites of his eyes showing beneath fluttering lids. Root's voice crackled in the dwarf's ears. Get a move on, Mulch Diggums, before that mudman gets up and rearranges your innards. He took out an entire retrieval team, you know. Mulch swallowed, his bravado suddenly deserting him. An entire retrieval team? Maybe I should get back underground for the good of the mission. Skipping hurriedly around the groaning bodyguard, Mulch took the steps 2 at a time. No point in worrying about creaking stairs when you've just sent the intestinal equivalent of Hurricane Hal scurrying around the corridors. He'd almost reached the cellar door when a figure shimmered into focus before him. Mulch recognized it as his arresting officer from the Renaissance Master's smuggling case. Captain Short! Mulch? I wasn't expecting to see you. The dwarf shrugged. Julius had a dirty job. Somebody had to do it. I get it, Holly nodded. You've already lost your magic. Smart. What'd you find out? Mulch showed Holly his find. This was in the safe. A copy of the book? Gasped Holly. No wonder we're in this fix. We were playing into his hands all along. Mulch opened the cellar door. Shall we? I can't. I'm under eyeball orders not to leave the house. Oh, you magical types and your rituals. You have no idea how liberating it is to be rid of all that mumbo-jumbo. A series of sharp noises drifted down from the upper landing. It sounded like a troll thrashing around in a crystal emporium. We can debate ethics at a later date. Right now, I suggest we make ourselves scarce. Mulch nodded. Agreed. This guy here took out an entire retrieval squad, apparently. Holly paused, half shielded. An entire squad? Fully equipped? I wonder. She continued her fade out, and the last thing to go was her widening grin. Mulch was tempted to hang around. There weren't many things more fun to watch than a heavily armed recon officer going to town on a bunch of unsuspecting humans. By the time Captain Short got through with this foul character, he'd be begging her to get out of his manor. Back to that foul character. The foul character in question was watching it all from the surveillance room. There was no denying it. Things were not good. Not good at all. Certainly not irredeemable. There was still hope. Artemis cataloged the events of the last few minutes. The manor's security had been compromised. The safe room was in shambles. Blown apart by some sort of fairy flatulence. Butler lay unconscious, possibly paralyzed by the same gaseous anomaly. His hostage was loose in the house, her fairy powers restored to her. There was an unsightly creature in leather pants burrowing holes beneath the foundations with no apparent regard for the fairy commandments. And the people had retrieved a copy of the book, one of several copies as it happened, including one on disc in the Swiss vault. Artemis's finger combed an errant strand of dark hair. He would have to dig very deep to uncover the good in this particular scenario. He took several deep breaths, finding his chi, as Butler had taught him. I just said. After several moments' contemplation, he realized that these factors meant little to the overall strategies of both sides. Captain Short was still trapped in the manor, and the time stoppage period was still running out. Soon the LEP would have no option but to launch their biobomb, and that was when Artemis Fowl would unveil his coup de grace. Of course, the whole thing depended on Commander Root. If Root was as intellectually challenged as he looked, it was quite possible the entire scheme would collapse around his ears. Artemis hoped fervently that someone on the ferry team had the wit to spot the blunder he'd made during the negotiation session. Back to Mulch. Mulch unbuttoned his back flap. Time to suck some dirt, as they said down in the mines. The trouble with dwarf tunnels was that they were self-sealing, so if you had to go back the way you came, there was a whole new burrow to be excavated. Some dwarfs retraced their steps exactly, chewing through the less compact and pre-digested dirt. Mulch preferred to dig a fresh tunnel. For some reason, eating the same dirt twice didn't really appeal to him. Unhinging his jaw, the dwarf pointed himself, torpedo-like, through the hole in the floorboards. His heart calmed immediately as the scent of minerals filled his nostrils. Safe. He was safe. Nothing could catch a dwarf underground, not even a scalien rockworm. That was, of course, if he managed to get underground. 10 very powerful fingers gripped Mulch by the ankles. This just wasn't the dwarf's day. First wart face, now this homicidal human. Some people never learn. Usually mud people. "Ego," he mumbled, unhinged jaw flapping uselessly. "Not a chance," came the reply. "The only way you're leaving this house is in a body bag." Mulch could feel himself being dragged backwards. This human was strong. There weren't many creatures that could dislodge a dwarf with a grip on something. He scrabbled in the dirt, cramming handfuls of wine-impregnated clay into his cavernous mouth. There was only one chance. "Come on, you little goblin. Get out of there." "Goblin?" "Goblin?" Right. Mulch would have been indignant had he not been busy chewing clay to eject at his enemy. The human stopped talking. Possibly he had noticed the flap and probably what was behind it. No doubt what had happened in the safe room was coming back to him. Oh, what would have followed the "oh" is anyone's guess. But I'd be willing to bet that it wouldn't have been, "Oh, dear me." As it happened, Butler never had time to finish this expletive because he wisely chose that moment to relinquish his grip. A wise choice indeed, because it coincided with the instant Mulch decided to launch his earthen offensive. A lump of compacted clay sped like a cannon directly at the spot where Butler's head had been barely a second previously. Had it still occupied that space, the impact would have separated it from Butler's shoulders. An ignoble end for a bodyguard of his caliber. As it was, the soggy missile barely grazed his ear. Nevertheless, the force was sufficient to spin Butler like an ice skater, landing him on his rump for the second time in as many minutes. By the time his vision had settled, the dwarf had disappeared in a maelstrom of churning muck. Butler decided not to attempt pursuit. Dying below ground was not very high on his things-to-do list. But there will be another day, Fairy, he thought grimly. And there was to be. But that, my friends, is part of another story. Mulch's momentum propelled him underground. He'd gone several yards along the loamy vein before he realized no one was following. Once the taste of earth had settled his heart rate, he decided it was time to implement his escape plan. The dwarf altered his course, chewing his way toward the rabbit warren he'd noted earlier. With any luck, the centaur hadn't run a seismology test on the manor grounds, or his ruse might be discovered. He'd just have to bank on the fact that they had more important things to worry about than a missing prisoner. There shouldn't be any problem deceiving Julius, but the centaur, he was a smart one. There's this odd rainbow on my face from the window. Mulch's internal compass steered him true, and within minutes he could feel the gentle vibrations of the rabbits loping along their tunnel. From here on, timing was crucial if the illusion was to be effective. He slowed his digging rate, poking the soft clay gently until his fingers breached the tunnel wall. Mulch was careful to look the other way, because whatever he saw would be showing up on the screen back at LEP headquarters. Laying his fingers on the tunnel floor like an upturned spider, Mulch waited. It didn't take long. In seconds, he felt the rhythmic thump of an approaching rabbit. The instant the animal's hind legs brushed the trap, he tightened his powerful digits around its neck. The poor animal never had a chance. "I'm sorry, friend," thought the dwarf. "If there was any other way." Pulling the rabbit's body through the hole, Mulch rehinged his jaw and began screaming, "Cave in! Cave in! Help! Help!" Now for the tricky bit. With one hand, he agitated the surrounding earth, bringing showers of it crumbling around on his own head. With the other hand, he popped the iris cam out of his left eye and slid it into the rabbit's eye. Given the almost total darkness and the landfall confusion, it should be almost impossible to spot the switch. Julius, please, help me! Mulch, what's happening? What's your status? What's my status? Thought the dwarf incredulously. Even in times of supposed crisis, the commander couldn't abandon his precious protocol. The dwarf dragged his final scream out, petering off to a gargling rattle. That was a bit melodramatic, perhaps, but Mulch could never resist theatrics. With a last regretful glance at the dying animal, he unhinged his jaw and finned off to the southeast. Freedom beckoned. Do you think Mulch is going to escape and get away? Boy, when we're ready for the next chapter, chapter 8, be prepared for an intense battle scene. The chapter is called Troll. You're not going to want to miss this one. See you in chapter 8.